Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Stories by Natalia. Tonight's story is about one of the most terrifying real-life incidents in history, written by Mr. John Henry Patterson, where two lions in Tsavo began hunting humans, turning a simple railway project into a complete nightmare. To make this story more immersive and easier to experience, I'll be telling it in a first-person narration, as if you're hearing it directly from the man who lived through it. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the darkness together.
It was supposed to be a normal night. I still remember those glowing red coals in the fire. The guys had finally drifted off to sleep, and for a minute, the jungle went totally silent. It was that creepy kind of quiet. Then, suddenly, we all heard a scream. It wasn't just a regular cry for help kind of scream. It was the kind of sound that hits you in the gut and stops your heart for a moment. I rushed out of my tent. Everyone else came running out too, some grabbing lamps, others still half asleep and confused. Then I saw it. A tent torn open into pieces. There was blood on the ground, and in the dim light I saw a shape moving in the shadows. It was dragging a man away without rushing. It was moving so slowly, so calmly, like it didn't care at all that we were watching. Nobody moved. We were all frozen. Right then, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a normal animal. I've been in scary spots before, but this was different. Whatever was out there wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting us. My name is John Henry Patterson, an Irish-born British soldier, hunter, author, and Christian Zionist. Back in 1898, I was sent to a middle-of-nowhere place in Africa called Tsavo. My job was straightforward, to build a bridge for the railroad. That was it. I had no clue that Tsavo was waiting for me in a way I have never thought of before. I knew about lions. We all do. They're supposed to hunt zebras and stay away from humans. That's the rule. But in Tsavo, this rules didn't exist. When I first got there, I could tell something was wrong. The workers were jumpy. They'd whisper at night to each other. Some were too terrified to sleep alone, and others kept the fires roaring until dawn. I thought they were just city guys scared of the woods, but I was dead wrong. The night I saw that man dragged into the dark, that wasn't a one-time thing, and it wasn't the last. No fence could keep these things out. Fire didn't scare them. Nobody knew who was next. It didn't take long for me to see the truth that these lions weren't acting like animals. They were watching us every minute of the day. They were studying us, learning our schedules, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they attacked, you didn't hear a thing. The village men started saying that this place is a curse. They said these weren't real lions, but something evil. I didn't used to believe in ghost stories, at least not back then. But as the nights passed and more men started vanishing, I realized, what did I actually get myself into? Whatever was out there in the dark wasn't afraid of me or anybody else out there, and soon I was going to have to stand my ground. Stay with me, because I'm taking you back to the very start, to the day I first arrived in Tsavo, when I thought this was just a paycheck and not a fight to stay alive. I still remember the day I first rolled into Tsavo. At that time, it didn't feel like anything special, just another job, another place, another project to manage. I had been sent to East Africa in 1898 to build a railway bridge over the Tsavo River. It was part of this huge project called the Uganda Railway. It sounded like an important job, sure, but I never thought it would be dangerous, at least not that kind of dangerous. The trip there was exhausting. It was days of traveling through heat that felt like a heavy weight pressing down on you. The land just went on forever. But when I finally stepped off at Tsavo, I remember just standing there, looking around. It was wild. I don't mean beautiful nature wild. I mean it felt raw, untouched, like humans didn't really belong there. There were dry grasslands, scrubby trees, and thick bushes everywhere. There was this weird silence that would come and go with the wind. Even the air felt heavy, like it was hiding a secret. But back then, I didn't think much of it. To me, it was just a construction site. The camp was already set up when I arrived. There were hundreds of workers there, mostly guys from India, living in tents. They were already busy. Tracks were being laid, supplies were moving, and everyone was working from sunrise to sunset. On the surface, everything looked totally normal, but pretty quickly I noticed something was off. The men weren't relaxed. Usually at these camps, you'd hear guys laughing in the evening, telling stories or cooking together after a long day. But here, it was quiet. A weird, controlled kind of quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. That first night, I took a walk around the camp to see how things were running. As I passed a group of workers sitting by a fire, they suddenly stopped talking. They looked at me, then at each other. It wasn't exactly fear. It was more like they were hesitating. I asked one of them if everything was okay. He just nodded fast and said, "Yes, sir, everything is fine." But the way he said it, it didn't feel right. It felt forced. Later, I asked one of the supervisors if there was a problem. He paused, just for a split second, but I caught it. Then he said, "No big deal, sir, just small stuff. Wild animals, you know." Wild animals. That didn't shock me. We were in Africa, after all. Lions, hyenas, leopards, that's what you expect. So I brushed it off. That was my first mistake. Over the next few days, I got to work. We had a bridge to build and no time to waste. During the day, everything was great. The men worked hard and we were making good progress. But as soon as the sun started to go down, things changed. I started noticing little things. Fires were being lit way earlier than usual. Men started huddling closer together at night instead of spreading out. Some of them flat out refused to sleep in their tents alone. I just figured they were city people who were scared of the woods. But then I started hearing things. One night, I heard whispering outside my tent. I stepped out quietly and saw a group of workers bunched together, talking in low voices. As soon as they saw me, they went dead silent again. This time, I didn't let it go. I walked up and said, "All right, tell me the truth. What's going on?" No one said a word. Finally, an older man spoke up very softly. "Sir," he said, "something is coming at night." I frowned. "What do you mean, something?" He hesitated, then whispered, "A lion, sir, but not like other lions." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like he was just letting his imagination run wild. I told him, "Lions live here, that's normal." But he shook his head slowly. Then he said something I'll never forget. "This one does not fear us." I didn't know what to say to that. The way he said it, it didn't sound like a rumor. It sounded like a fact. Still, I tried to be the practical boss. I told them we'd make the camp stronger. We'd build thick fences out of thorn bushes. They called them bomas around the tents. We'd keep the fires burning all night and put guards on watch. For a minute, that seemed to work. The men looked a bit more relaxed. I went back to my tent thinking it was all just a big misunderstanding. But that night, as I lay down to sleep, I had this weird feeling. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was just unease, like something was wrong with the world. The jungle was quiet, way too quiet. No crickets, no animal sounds, nothing. And then, somewhere far out in the dark, I heard it. A low, deep sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. A lion's call. I'd heard lions before, but this one sounded different. I told myself I was just overthinking it, that it was just another night in Africa. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Because what I didn't know then was that the something the workers were terrified of was already there. It was watching us. It was learning our names. It was waiting. And soon, it was going to make its move.
I wish I could say that first attack took me by surprise, but if I'm being honest, deep down, I think I already knew something was coming. That weird silence, the look on the workers' faces, the way the night felt way heavier than it should have, it was all leading to this. I just didn't realize how fast it would happen. It was only a few nights after I talked to the workers. The camp had settled down like it always did. Fires were going, guards were on duty, and the men had gone to bed, though you could tell nobody was actually sleeping well. I was in my tent, just staring at the canvas, trying to get some rest. Then, out of nowhere, a scream. It wasn't a long, drawn-out cry. It was sharp, sudden, the kind of sound that rips through the air and then just vanishes, like it was never meant to be heard. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Then, everything went dead quiet again. I grabbed my rifle and bolted outside. Other guys were already waking up, stumbling out of their tents looking confused and terrified. Someone shouted, "Where did it come from?" Nobody had an answer. We lit more lamps and started moving toward the sound, slowly, carefully. To be honest, nobody wanted to be the one to find whatever was waiting out there. And then we saw it. A tent, ripped wide open. It wasn't just damaged or pushed aside, it was shredded like someone had torn through a piece of paper. Something incredibly strong had forced its way inside. There was blood on the dirt, fresh, dark, and still wet. One of the men stepped forward, his hands shaking like leaf. He called out a name. No response. Then we saw the drag marks, deep grooves in the dirt leading away from the tent and disappearing right into the blackness beyond the firelight. I followed them for a few steps, just a few, but then I stopped. Something inside my gut told me, don't go any further. The jungle past that point felt different, darker. It didn't feel like empty space anymore. It felt like something was staring back at us. We didn't find him that night, not a trace. It was like the darkness had just swallowed him whole. That was the moment everything changed. The fear that had been hiding in whispers was now real. You could see it, you could feel it. The camp wasn't just jumpy anymore, it was paralyzed. The next morning, the vibe was totally different. No one talked unless they had to. Work slowed to a crawl. Some men refused to even leave the camp, and a few came straight to me saying they were done. They wanted out of Tsavo. I couldn't blame them, but I couldn't let the project die either. Too many people were counting on this bridge. So, I did what I thought was right. I ordered the defenses to be doubled. We built thicker thorn fences, added more guards, and kept the fires roaring bigger and brighter than ever. And I made one more rule for myself. No more deep sleep. If that thing came back, I was going to be ready. For a couple of nights, nothing happened. I actually started to think maybe it was just one random lion that moved on. Maybe the nightmare was over. But Tsavo had other plans. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, I was wide awake, lying in my tent and listening to every tiny sound. Then I heard it. Movement, very close. It wasn't loud, just a tiny rustle, a slight shift in the air, the kind of sound you'd miss if you weren't listening for your life. I held my breath. Every instinct told me something was right outside. Then another scream, louder this time, longer, pure, raw terror. I was out of my tent in a second, and this time I was fast enough to see it. Just for a heartbeat, in the dim glow of the fire, I saw a shape, huge, powerful. It was moving away from the camp, dragging something behind it. It didn't run. That's what messed with my head the most. It walked, calmly, like it knew for a fact that nobody would dare try to stop it. I raised my rifle, tried to get a shot, but just like that, it vanished into the shadows. Gone. We followed the trail again, lanterns shaking, men whispering prayers. But it was the same story. Blood, drag marks, and then nothing. That's when the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time thing. We were being hunted, and it wasn't just one lion. It was something smarter, something that understood us, something that knew exactly when to strike. Over the next few days, the attacks didn't stop. They got worse. They were more frequent, more daring. The lions, and by now I knew there were 2 of them, started walking into the camp like they owned it. They didn't care about the fires. They didn't care about the noise. They didn't even care about us. They'd slip in silently, pick their target, and leave before anyone could even blink. The men were breaking. Some wouldn't sleep at all. Others climbed trees at night, hoping to stay out of reach. A lot of them just packed up and ran. Work on the bridge pretty much stopped. Fear was running the show now. I realized then that this wasn't about a railway anymore. This was a war. If I didn't stop these lions, the project would fail and people would just keep dying. So I made a choice, a dangerous one. I wasn't going to sit around and wait anymore. I wasn't going to just defend. I was going to hunt them. I didn't know how long it would take or if I'd even make it back, but I knew one thing for sure. This had to end.
At this point, fear had completely taken over the camp. It wasn't just the look in the men's eyes anymore. It was in the way they moved, the way they spoke, even the way they breathed. Every snap of a twig at night made them jump. Every shadow looked like a killer. And honestly, I couldn't blame them, because now I'd seen it too. These lions weren't like anything I'd ever dealt with. They didn't rush in and they didn't panic. They didn't act like wild animals that were supposed to be afraid of humans. No, these things moved with a kind of confidence that really got under my skin. It was as if they knew something we didn't. But I'd made my choice. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for the next person to be taken. I was going to find them, and I was going to stop them. First, I had to figure out their routine. I started staying awake almost all night, just sitting there in the dark, listening and watching. At first, it felt like a total waste of time. Hours would crawl by and nothing would happen. Just silence, the wind, or some distant animal noise. But then, I started noticing a pattern. They didn't come every single night, and they didn't just attack at random. They were watching us. They were waiting for the perfect moment. They were picking their time carefully. Once I realized that, I changed my strategy. Instead of hiding in my tent, I decided to make myself the target. Yeah, it sounds crazy. Even now, thinking back, I realize how insane it was. But at the time, it felt like my only move. I built a small wooden platform, just a basic raised stand near the camp. From up there, I had a good view of the area.
I tied a goat nearby as bait, grabbed my rifle, and waited. The first night, nothing. The goat was fine, the jungle was quiet, and I just sat there in the heat, covered in bugs, trying not to move. The second night was exactly the same. By then, I was just frustrated. I knew those lions were out there somewhere, watching, waiting, and I had no clue when they'd decide to strike again. But on the third night, everything shifted. I remember it so clearly. The air felt thick and heavy. Suddenly, the goat got restless. It started pulling at the rope, making these soft, nervous little sounds. And then I heard it. A tiny movement in the grass. It was so quiet and so careful that I almost missed it. I gripped my rifle tight and stared into the dark. Then I saw them. Two shapes, not one, two. They moved slowly, almost silently, bellies low to the ground. Their eyes caught the faint glow of the firelight. For a second, I forgot to breathe. Seeing them like that, so calm and so in control, it didn't feel like I was looking at animals. It felt like I was being watched by something that knew exactly what it was doing.
They didn't just charge the goat. That's what really shocked me. Instead, they circled it, slowly, carefully, like they were checking for a trap, like they were looking for me. A chill went right down my spine. I realized right then, they knew. They knew something was up. One of the lions stopped. It lifted its head and looked directly at where I was sitting. I froze. I didn't even dare to blink. Seconds passed, maybe even minutes. Time just feels weird when you're staring at a man-eater. Then, without warning, they just turned around and disappeared. Just like that. I didn't fire. I didn't even move. I just sat there trying to process it. They had come so close, and yet they chose to walk away. I didn't sleep a wink that night, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood this was not going to be easy. These lions weren't desperate or messy. They were patient, they were smart, and they were incredibly careful. Over the next few days, I tried everything. Different spots, different bait, different traps, but it was always the same. Either they wouldn't show up at all, or they'd get close, sense something was off, and vanish. It was like a game of cat and mouse, and they were always one step ahead. Meanwhile, the attacks didn't stop. Even while I was hunting them, they kept sneaking into the camp, killing people, and disappearing. It was like they were mocking me, reminding me that they were still the ones in charge. The workers were losing all hope. Some had already packed up and left, and the rest were planning to. I could feel the pressure. Every time I failed, it meant another life was lost, and I couldn't live with that. So, I decided to take a much bigger risk. If they wouldn't come to my traps, I was going to go to them. I was going to track them down in their own territory. I'd find where they slept, where they moved, and find the right moment to hit back. It was dangerous, and I knew it, but I didn't have a choice. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. This was a war. And I wasn't the only one trying to win.
By now, I'd stopped thinking like an engineer. The bridge, the railroad, the deadlines, all of that didn't matter anymore. Every single thought in my head was focused on one thing: finding those lions. The camp had changed. It didn't feel like a place where people worked anymore. It felt like a place under siege. Men barely slept, the fires burned all night, and even during the day, you could feel the tension. It was like everyone was just holding their breath, waiting for the next person to die. I knew if I didn't do something soon, there wouldn't be anyone left to protect. So, I started tracking them. Every morning after an attack, I'd go out and study the ground. I looked for anything. Footprints, broken grass, drag marks. At first, it was hard. The ground was dry and the tracks were messy. But slowly, I started to figure them out. They weren't just wandering around. They had paths. They had specific routes they used. And I realized they had a spot, a home base, somewhere deep in the bush. One afternoon, I was following a trail when I noticed the tracks were fresh, really fresh. I slowed way down. Every step I took was as quiet as a whisper. The jungle around me felt watchful. And then I heard it. A low sound. Not a roar, just a sound. I stopped dead. I didn't move a muscle. I slowly looked around, trying not to make a single peep. And that's when I saw it. Not far from me, half hidden in the tall grass, one of the lions. For a second, the whole world just stopped. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just me and that lion. It was bigger than I ever imagined. Powerful. Its body was perfectly still, but its eyes, they were locked right on me. There's a feeling you get when a predator looks at you. It's hard to describe. It's not just being scared. It's this sudden, sharp realization that you are not the one in charge anymore. I gripped my rifle. I didn't point it right away because I knew if I messed up this one move, it was over for me. The lion didn't growl. It didn't charge. It just stood there, watching. A few heavy seconds ticked by. Then, very slowly, I started to lift my gun. The second I moved, the lion moved too. It didn't run at me. It darted sideways, fast, smooth, like it knew exactly what I was about to do. I fired. Bang! The sound of the shot shattered the silence. Birds flew off. The air shifted. But the lion didn't fall. It let out this deep, angry snarl and leaped into the bushes. Gone. I stood there, my heart redlining. I knew I'd hit it. I was sure of it. But it wasn't enough. And now I had a wounded lion on my hands. That's 100 times more dangerous than a healthy one.
I followed the trail carefully. There were drops of blood on the ground, small, but I could see them. Every step I took felt heavier, more dangerous. I was walking straight into the territory of an injured killer. It could be anywhere. I moved deeper into the thick brush. It was getting darker and more cramped. Then suddenly, a sound, right next to me. Before I could even blink, the lion burst out from the side. It was so fast, so powerful, and way closer than I expected. For a split second, everything felt frozen. Then, instinct took over. I whipped the rifle up and fired again. This time, the shot hit home. The lion stumbled. It let out one last furious roar, and then it collapsed. I didn't move, not for a while. I kept my rifle aimed right at it, waiting. I've seen animals fake it before, and I wasn't taking any chances. But after a minute, it was clear. It was over. The first lion was dead. I stepped closer, still on high alert. Up close, it looked even more terrifying. Even dead, it looked like it owned the place. But at the same time, I felt this massive wave of relief. For the first time in weeks, I thought, maybe this nightmare is actually going to end. I went back to camp with the news, and for the first time in forever, I saw something new on the men's faces. Hope. They gathered around, some of them crying, some of them just staring in shock. That night, the camp felt a little less like a graveyard. But deep down,
I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. There were 2 lions, and the second one, it was still out there. And something told me it was about to get a whole lot meaner.
When that first lion died, for a moment, it actually felt like we had won. I'm not gonna lie to you, even I felt it. That huge weight lifting off my chest, that tiny bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, this whole nightmare was finally over. That evening, the vibe in the camp was completely different. Men were talking a little louder. Some of them were actually smiling for the first time in weeks. The fires were still burning bright, but they weren't burning out of pure, shaking terror this time. It felt like we could all finally take a real deep breath. But that feeling, it didn't last long, because the very next night, everything went to hell again. I was resting in my tent, still completely wiped out from the hunt the day before. My body was exhausted, but my mind, it just wouldn't shut off. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A sound. Not far from the camp. It wasn't a scream this time. It was something way worse. It was total chaos. I heard men shouting, people running, voices filled with absolute raw panic. I grabbed my rifle and bolted outside. The second I stepped into the night air, I knew. It was back. The second lion. But something about this attack felt different. It was meaner, more aggressive. We followed the noise and reached one of the tents, and what I saw there, it was worse than anything I'd seen before. The tent wasn't just ripped open this time, it was basically shredded to pieces. The ground was covered in blood, way more blood than the other attacks. The men standing around me were physically shaking. One of them pointed into the darkness, his hand trembling so much he could barely keep it steady. "It didn't run, sir. It stayed, and it fought." That sentence stuck with me, because now I understood something clearly. This lion wasn't just looking for a meal anymore. It had changed. Maybe it was because it lost its partner. Maybe it was just getting desperate. Or maybe it was just getting more confident because it knew we couldn't stop it. Whatever the reason, the caution was gone. It was being bold now.
Men started quitting and leaving the camp for good. Some just packed their bags and vanished without saying a word. Others came to me begging, literally crying for me to let them go. Work on the bridge? That was completely dead. The camp, which used to have hundreds of workers, was slowly becoming a ghost town. I could feel the pressure crushing me, not just from the situation, but from the clock. Every single day that passed meant another person was on the menu, and I still hadn't stopped it. I tried everything, more traps, thicker fences, extra guards, but nothing worked. It was like this lion understood every move we made. It dodged the traps, it found the weak spots, it hit us exactly when we weren't looking. Slowly, even I began to feel it, that total exhaustion, that voice in the back of my head asking, how do you even stop something like this? So, one night, I decided to try something different. No traps, no bait, just patience. I picked a spot near the camp where the attacks usually happened, and I just sat there, all alone, rifle ready. Hours went by, nothing happened. The night got deeper and colder. Every tiny snap of a twig made me jump. Every little movement in the grass felt like a life or death moment. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but definitely there. I didn't move. I didn't even dare to breathe. And slowly out of the pitch-black darkness, it showed up. The second lion. I saw it clearly this time. It was closer than I'd ever seen a live one. It looked different from the first lion, not just how it looked, but how it moved. It had this intensity. It was focused. It didn't hesitate, it didn't circle around, it just walked forward, straight toward the camp like it owned the place, like it had done this so many times it didn't even need to think anymore. I raised my rifle slowly, carefully. This was it, my one big chance. But just as I was about to pull the trigger, the lion stopped. It turned its head and looked right at me. That same feeling washed over me again. It knew, it could sense me even in the dark. For a second I hesitated, and that 1 second was all it needed. The lion moved, not away, but forward, fast. I fired. The shot boomed across the camp. The lion flinched, but it didn't drop. Instead, it let out this terrifying, angry roar and vanished back into the shadows. I lowered my gun, and my hands were actually shaking. I'd hit it, but I hadn't killed it. And now it was a wounded lion. This lion was already a nightmare, but now it was a wounded nightmare with nothing left to lose. And believe me, that is the most dangerous thing on this earth.
By this point, I was just totally exhausted. I wasn't just tired in my body, my brain was fried too. Days and nights had started to blur together into one long, stressful mess. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. Every single thought, every breath I took was focused on just one thing: ending this nightmare once and for all. The second lion was still out there. He was wounded, he was bleeding, and he was probably angrier than anything I had ever faced in my entire life. And the camp, well, what was left of it, was barely holding on by a thread. Most of the workers had already packed their bags and vanished into the night. The few guys who stayed only did so because they literally had no other choice. But even they had lost any sense of feeling safe. Every single night felt like it could be their last on Earth. And to be honest, I felt the exact same way. But I knew one thing for sure. This had to end, and it had to end now. Because if it didn't, there wouldn't be anything left of this project to save. So, I made my final plan. No more waiting around and no more giving him chances. This time, I was going to finish it. I picked a spot near the camp, a place where the lion had already attacked a few times before. I prepared everything with extra care. I checked my rifle 3 times, I made sure my gear was ready, and then I waited. That night felt longer than any night I'd ever lived through. The air was dead still. It felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Even the normal sounds of the jungle, the bugs, the distant animals, they were all missing. It was that kind of creepy silence that makes you feel like something huge is about to happen. Hours crawled by. Nothing. For a minute, I actually thought maybe he wouldn't show up. Maybe he'd finally moved on, or maybe he'd died out in the bush from his wounds. I was just starting to think that maybe it was over in a way I didn't expect. And then I heard it. A low sound. Close. Really, really close. Every muscle in my body went tight. I slowly lifted my rifle, my eyes glued to the pitch-black darkness ahead of me. And then he appeared. The lion just walked out, slowly. He wasn't sneaking around or trying to hide this time. He was just walking. It was like he wasn't afraid of anything anymore. Like this was his land and we were the ones who didn't belong. He came closer, step by step, and this time I didn't hesitate for a single second. I took careful aim and I fired. The bullet hit him. I knew it did. The lion reacted instantly, letting out this deep, powerful roar that echoed through the entire camp and probably miles beyond it. But he didn't fall. Instead, he charged. He came straight at me. In that moment, everything happened so fast I didn't even have time to think. There was no time to plan or get scared. It was just pure instinct. I stood my ground, raised the rifle again, and fired a second time. That shot hit him even harder. The lion stumbled, his legs giving way for a second, but he still kept moving. He was closer now, so close I could actually hear his heavy, ragged breath. I could feel the ground shaking under his weight. And then I fired one last time. This time, he finally stopped. He was just a few steps away from me. His body shook for a second, and then he just collapsed, right there in the dirt. Silence. Total, absolute silence. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I didn't lower my rifle, and I didn't even breathe properly. I had to be sure. I had to be 100% sure he wasn't going to get back up. And then, slowly, it became clear. It was over. The second lion was dead. I stood there for a long time just looking at him. I wasn't looking at him with fear, and I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt this deep, heavy, overwhelming sense of relief. After weeks of living in total terror, after so many lives had been lost, after everything we had been through, it was finally done. When I eventually walked back into camp, the reaction wasn't what I expected. There was no loud cheering, no big celebration, just silence. But then, slowly, the look on everyone's faces started to change. They didn't look happy exactly, but they looked calmer. They looked safer. The fear was finally gone. In the days that followed, work slowly started up again. The men who had run away started to trickle back in. We got back to building the bridge. And Tsavo? It gradually went back to being what it was supposed to be, just another place on the map. But for me, it would never be just a place again. I knew what had happened there. I knew what I'd seen and what I'd had to face. 2 lions that didn't act like any animals I'd ever known. 2 predators that had turned humans into their prey. It was a time in my life that I will never, ever forget. Even years later, people still ask me about Tsavo. They ask about the lions and how many people were actually lost. Some say it was over 100. Others think it was less. But the numbers don't really matter to me. What matters is the fear I saw in those men's eyes. What matters is the loss. I stood face to face with something I never expected to encounter in this world. The Tsavo man-eaters. And even now, when I think back to those nights, I can still hear it. That silence, that soft movement in the darkness, and that feeling that something out there is still watching and waiting.
And that's the story of the Tsavo man-eaters. A nightmare that once felt endless, but finally came to an end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Midnight Stories by Natalia for more real and chilling stories like this. And let me know in the comments, what story should we explore next? Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next story.